Are you ready for the joke of the week? Well, this week's joke is a joke. Yes. An interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not that good. An interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not that good. Keep that in mind. Welcome to Design Career Networks. Get that UX job. We are an experienced design channel teaching designers how to enhance their careers and get that job. I'm Andy Galper and I'm your host. I'm a designer, a content strategist, and a producer. I also run Cascade SF here in San Francisco, which is also an experience design organization. We work with some of the biggest companies in tech, including Adobe, Google, and more. And today I'm here with Gretchen Anderson, author of Mastering Collaboration. And this book is wonderful. We'll be giving away copies of it today. I highly recommend it. I've learned a ton about working with others and also just kind of like understanding different processes and communication styles. It's awesome. So stick around. And Gretchen will teach you today how to ace your UX job interview, which is also product design job interview. Gretchen worked at PG&E as the head of product design for a while, and now she's an independent consultant / working at California for the College of Arts, and she's teaching design and training the next generation of designers. And Gretchen, welcome. How are you?
Oh, great. Thanks. So great to be here.
Great. Get some water. Let's do this. Okay, and we have quite a few people online joining us today. Comments, can you all hear us okay? Hello from Austin. Hello from Los Angeles. We have the entire United States and the world in our hands here. Now, I am going to escape and let Gretchen take the stage and let her give a presentation for about 35 minutes or so. And then after the presentation, I'll sneak back online and we'll do a Q&A. Save your questions because Gretchen is here to answer them and help you get that UX job. And hello, Kate and David and Eliza and Alex and another David and Dara and Heather and Jonathan and Jess and Eliza, another Eliza. Sorry, just saying hi. Okay, so here we go. And let's add this to the stream. Let's change that background so it's not distracting. And let's get me out of the way, speaking of the distraction.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to be here, as I said, with you. I want to talk about nailing that job interview today. As Andy mentioned, I teach at CCA. I teach senior thesis class there. I've also worked both in design studio backgrounds and in-house. So I've got, kind of different experiences I'll kind of give you some insight from. And to start out, hey, congratulations, you're ready to get your next gig, but now what? I want to preface this by saying that interviewing for a design job is kind of like the job of design in that there's a lot of it depends. If you're on Twitter, I'm on Twitter, and I see a lot of people especially kind of very senior people, make these sweeping statements about what everyone should be doing in design gigs, and none of them agree with each other. So just know that going into this, I'm going to give you my perspective and talk a little bit about how you could triangulate to someone who might feel a little differently. For those of you who are just getting out of school, know that kind of the first job is the hardest one to get. Sort of this catch-22. Once you've had a job, you've got some credibility, you've got stuff in your portfolio that's real. So, you don't have to tie yourself in knots about getting the job. You can get a job, and then if it's not working out for you, you'll be able to move on to the next one more easily. But if you look for good people that you want to learn from, that's probably my best advice in terms of like, where should I go? Where should I go and look for a job? So that's to get started. So I'm going to talk about I'm going to do this in two sections. I'll talk about sort of the portfolio, because in my perspective, a portfolio is like the key part of the job interview. I just saw someone on Twitter recently talk about how no designer should have a portfolio. And I was like, I have now heard it all. Everyone has an opinion. But a portfolio is really the best way that people are going to judge your work, especially if you're earlier in your career. And then I'll talk a little bit about the interview itself, or the other half will be about the interview itself. So the first step, kind of preparing for the interview, is to do your research. If you can find out who is reviewing your portfolio, you can get at those little idiosyncrasies that different people have. And I'll talk a little bit more about my idiosyncrasies. But people on Twitter and LinkedIn are often saying, I wish interviewees would do X or Y. I wish they would write me a thank you note. I don't care if they write me a thank you note, whatever. So all of those little research bits are good if you can find out who you're interviewing with. Also, the company itself. Don't just kind of walk in assuming this is another company and I just want a job. You have to present yourself as someone who's, looked them up and understands their business to some degree. If there's a salient news item that isn't totally negative, that's a good thing to kind of keep in your back pocket to bring up in the interview. So talking about portfolios, I have found that the most powerful portfolios tell me the story of what you learned. You're unlikely to have invented Facebook at this point in your career. You're unlikely to have, a track record that a VC is going to put money in. If you do, remember me, remember all of us when you get big. But it's really about saying, I thought the answer was X. And then I went and did my research with people and found out really why was more important. Those pivot points are really important. So that storytelling about the insights you gain help me understand how you're going to react when inevitably something that you do is not right, is not perfect. We as designers are never done, right? Some of you who've been at this for a while might notice that. So it's less about saying, here is my perfect, shiny, finished object. It's more about showing that you can learn and how you learn. Applying your design skills to the interview and to the portfolio is important. So as I mentioned, different people have different views on portfolios. I think I'm going to genericize. That's what I do with my students. I boil it down to two personas. One is like me. I'm a skimmer. I want to look and see a beauty shot. I want to see what solution you came up with. I want to see the highlights of that storytelling. I am probably not going to scrutinize every single deliverable and process step in your portfolio, at least not ahead of time. I might ask you questions about it in an interview. Other people really want that detail. So I coach my students to say, you have two personas. One is the exhaustive reader that wants all the details, and one is a skimmer. And so using that, you could design a portfolio that kind of meets both of the needs. Uses some progressive disclosure to keep me moving through. Another thing, especially in the era of Zoom and COVID, which I know we're maybe emerging from a little bit, but it's still salient to think about your portfolio as something that is self-driven, that I am going about and looking at on my own versus when you present it to me. So sometimes what I've seen people do is they have slides for when they're in a presentation and they're presenting from slides, and the website is more standalone. I've also seen people do an excellent job of presenting from their website. But that website has to be designed then for both me to explore my own and for you to present from. So think about how you're going to deal with those two modes, whether you're in person, virtual or not, or whether you've sent it ahead and they're looking at it. I struggle with this myself. I've been at this a while. I go into certain meetings thinking, oh, I know that I want to talk about this, that, and the other thing. And then in the moment, I realize actually it's this, that, and this other thing that I want to talk about. And so think about how you can easily cruise through your portfolio on the fly, bring up things that might be salient. Maybe it's not the same domain, but you had a UI widget that is similar to the problem that they're talking about. Make it easy for yourself to quickly traverse your projects, even if you planned to talk about A, B, and C, and now you got to do X, Y, and Z. Um, if you're sending it to me ahead of time, how are you going to direct me if you want me to look at a specific piece? Oh, this project is really salient, and here's a more direct link to it than my homepage. So think about that. I always encourage people to have an about me section on their website. This can be a little controversial if we're talking about a place that's doing more blind interviews, and that might become more and more of a more and more of a thing. But while we're at it and using names and pictures, whatever, it is helpful if I can get a sense of you as a person in terms of what are your interests, what are your passions. I don't mean show me like every oil painting you've ever done. Like, I think that's a trap people fall into, is like, I've done all those different kinds of work. If you are going for a UX job, your UX portfolio should be pretty squarely UX focused. But I am interested in this other section of like, what makes you tick or what's interesting about you. Some of that you're doing to seed the conversation in an interview with somebody to make a connection. It is also totally fine to not do that. It is totally fine to be like, I'm, a person that's going to show up professionally and I don't want to let you into my personal life. In which case, about me is a very, here's my portfolio, here's my resume. See ya. I think we've all had the experience, and this is actually one of the reasons I wrote the collaboration book, is that many designers, not just designers, engineers and product people have this mentality too of like, I'm going to come up with the idea. I'm going to win the war of ideas. And what I will say is I have never been in a situation where one person came up with the idea. It is always a team effort. And as designers, it's especially a team effort because the things we make do not get out in the world really unless we can collaborate with engineers and product people. And so you want to tell a story of the team, or it might be that you are an interaction designer, not so strong of a visual designer, and you worked with a visual designer. You want to be able to talk about, here's the big solution, and here's my role in it, and celebrate the fact that you worked with different people instead of trying to hide it or claiming other people's work, which I know you would never do. But it's really important to say, hey, I know this looks great. Just to be clear, I didn't do the visual design. I was really focused on the user research and the flows or whatever it was that you did. Or I did do the visual design and I wasn't so much on the technical side. Or being clear about how you talk about that teamwork, again, is a signal to me that you are capable of working in a team, that you like working in a team, because you're going to have to work in a team. Odds are that team might be very small, but you still need to be able to show that you can partner with people and not kind of try to win. Okay, so that was talking about your portfolio and showing your work. Now I want to talk about the interview itself. I know different people have different reactions to the kind of stress of being in an interview. It can be really intimidating, can be a little scary. Take a deep breath. Really, the secret to interviewing is to just interview a lot. I've often gone on interviews for jobs I knew I did not want, just to sort of get myself in that cadence of being able to tell my story and kind of stay sharp for interviewing. So don't sweat every single interview as though it's a one shot. It's really a process. And so the first bit of advice is to get really good at, if you don't know the answer to something, say, I don't know the answer to that specific question you just asked me, but here's how I would think about it. Or, but here is I've never done work with cardiac patients, but I did do some work with diabetic patients, and I wonder if the similarities might be blah, blah, blah. And being good at showing how you can draw connections from what you do know to what they might be asking you about. Because I do hear from some of my students and colleagues that people are kind of asking for you to show up having done the exact job they want to hire you for again. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But if you can get good at drawing those synthesis, that's great. And also, I don't know is a totally valid thing to say. I am reminded of when I worked at Frog Design. my dear friend Mahin and I were on a sales call, and right before he said, "Whatever you do, don't say I don't know." And I was like, "Okay, I won't say I don't know." And then the client asked me some questions. We were showing our work. How long did this project that I had no connection to that was done years ago take? And I looked at my hand and I thought, I don't know. I don't know, but I'll go find out for you. So it's okay. That term is an okay one to use. Don't feel like you have to walk in there, especially if you're earlier in your career, knowing everything. Be aware of how much time you have. This is something that even I struggle with. I get these kind of speaking engagements, and I always have to keep my eye on the clock because that person is giving you an allotted amount of time, and they kind of want to see what you can do with it. So make sure you're clear on, I have 4 30-minute interviews and a 45-minute portfolio review or whatever the schedule is. Kind of get it and hang on to it, and try, even if you're a little nervous and overwhelmed, to stay on top of time. I remember I was interviewing a lovely man a few years ago, who I did end up hiring, but I'd sort of had him come in for an hour-long interview, 45 minutes of which was a portfolio review, and sort of an hour and a half later, he was still going, and I had to go, but my team was very engaged and stayed with him, and we ended up hiring him. And if he hadn't been such a lovely person, I might have thought, did he not pay? He clearly was not tracking with time here. So be aware of that time, unless you're really charming and they'll hire you anyway. Then there is the, I don't know, dreaded, beloved, I'd love to hear from what you think, design test. And I think more and more places are doing this. I spent some time at Cooper where we definitely had a test. We called it the 5-step test. And that was because it was the 5 steps from here to the whiteboard. Had to grab the pen and start doing some design work on the whiteboard. I think there and other places also, there was like a take-home test ahead of time that you would bring in and turn in. That can be stressful. And again, this is less about you coming up with the absolute right solution. I would say these tests are a mix of almost trying to get you to do free work, like it's a really hyper-specific solution to what you might even be working on, or it's completely abstracted from that. And then it's almost like a Kobayashi Maru, like unsolvable problem. I remember being given a test one time to redesign basically like Microsoft Outlook calendaring. And I was like, it's a lot to do in this interview right now, right? Like that's a problem that's been tackled a lot. It's very complex. And that test is really more about seeing how I react when they say, is that really a good solution? What about this problem? And watching you react to getting feedback, getting questions. It's how you show up and less what you show up with. So if you can show up as someone who takes feedback very thoughtfully, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Who can ask questions? Do we know anything about how frequently this happens? Those kinds of questions that show that you're engaged in solving the problem and less showing off your skills. And then finally, that a test is like a design crit like any other. And so as I say to my students, the number one thing to not do in the situation is get defensive, right? So defending your idea in the face of feedback, even if you are sure you're right and that person is clueless, is not a good look. So if you can, again, like, oh, I hear what the feedback you're giving me is this, and you might decide to throw that feedback out. That's your prerogative. But just try to avoid getting defensive, especially in the moment of this test. This is an opportunity for you also to get a sense of how it is to work at a place. Is the feedback coming at you like it's a competition? Or is the feedback coming at you like questions and curiosity and people wanting you to go to the next step? That will give you a clue about probably what it's like to work there day to day. And both of those are fine paradigms. It's up, it's where you want to work. As I mentioned about keeping your eye on time, I always err on the side of plan your basic spiel to be, however long, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, and then be able to go into more detail. Make them ask for more detail, because it's really bad if you've launched into a 20-minute long show of a project that you care a lot about that is completely irrelevant to me or that I'm not fully understanding. And so not everybody's going to interrupt you and say, this isn't relevant. Can we move on? You're just kind of eating away at some goodwill. So come up with your again, 30-second, 5-minute, 10-minute, long, 20-minute, hopefully maybe not that long, description of a project that will really help you and be able to switch between them if somebody wants more information. Now, that's a big help. You still have to have a story, right? So if your story is, how I learned to stop worrying and love glucose meters, then that's your overall story. But I can tell an 30-second ad spot story. I can tell a quick, here's the problem and here's basically what I did and the basic solution. And here is me airing all of the process laundry about how I got there. And I've also come to hear that the interviewing rounds are getting a little bit out of control again. Maybe it's because we're all remote and it's a little bit cheaper to do. But you might have a first round with someone who isn't even really a designer, that is more in HR and who is trying to screen for you to get to the next step. And so if you can ascertain that that person is not really a designer, then shy away from using really designerly technical speak and really bring your user-centered chops into bear to say, I want to talk to this person like I would talk to an executive or a client or someone who is, one step removed from the work, as opposed to the person you're actually going to be working with, right? Whether it's going to be your boss or your coworker, where you can talk in a more designerly way. That's a really good thing to practice, because that's true even when you get the job and you have to start presenting to non-designers. It's a great thing to practice, but it's especially important to know where you are in the rounds of interviewing and to know, I've already shown some work to these people. What else can I show if you have to come back for whatever reason? And then don't forget to interview them. So what questions do you have? I think sometimes it feels a little odd when you've grilled this person for an hour and you're like, what questions do you have? And you're like, no, I don't really have any. And you wonder, are you actually interested in this job, or are you just looking for a job? And again, that is fine for you to be in that position, but don't lead with that, right? Come armed with questions about the culture, the work style. A good question is how do you all make design decisions? If there's disagreement or there's lots of ideas, how do you work through that? How do you involve people throughout the process? How long are you working on one thing? How do you organize work? All of those questions will show your curiosity about what you're hoping to get into, and not just kind of taking for granted that you either will know how that works or you don't really care. So just a few final presentation tips. We'll do some Q&A. Be confident. Fake it till you make it, baby. I grew up as a dancer and an actress, and that's been a great insight for me as a presenter, is to just always pretend like you know what you're doing, even if you don't. You have talent. You've done this. You have a craft. You might be nervous, but take a deep breath and project some confidence. And you can practice that, right? You can practice saying certain things over and over again. You can practice saying that I don't know about that, but I can get back to you on that. Or it feels a little bit like this other thing. Excuse me, that's my dog. Solicit questions as you go. Make sure people are understanding you. Try not to monologue, kind of like I am now. I would more normally prefer to be in a conversation rather than kind of monologuing for a half an hour. So see if you can make sure people are understanding, or stop every so often. Does anyone have a question? That shows that you're really kind of, again, a good partner. Research that audience and research the domain. See if you can relate your work to that. Slow down when you speak. Drink water. Take pauses, especially if English is not your first language. Go slow. I think making sure you're understood is better than trying to go for fluency that might not be there. I will say I am a Spanish speaker, and I went to go do work in Chile, and I realized wow, I'm not maybe as solid a speaker as I thought, and I'm not as solid an understander as I thought. And it really helped for me to slow down and ask other people to slow down. Then there is what I call previously on lost, which means as you're moving through, whether this is stages of an interview or you got the job and you're presenting work over and over, get really good at the last time we met, I showed you this and I did, the highlights was this. This time I'm going to show you that. If you think about how TV shows set up the like previously on, they take you back in time, even if it's not, it's a little bit of revisionist history, right? Like they might bring up a character from way back because they're going to pop up again in the story arc. So you can do something similar. You learn that there's a new development. You can bring something back that you presented before to make it relevant going forward. And then finally, practice. I mean, I think there is something to over rehearsing. I, for one, if I over rehearse, I really lose my joy about it. But there is also something about practicing enough that you can get that confidence, that certain things can roll off your tongue, that 30-second spiel comes right out. You've got a like really concise statement about every project you're showing. You've got a really concise statement about what you're looking for or what questions you have. Practicing those things, practicing if it's a freelance job or even, I guess, a full-time job, what kind of money do you want, right? You might get the questions, what's your hourly rate? I think somebody on Twitter the other day was like, I don't need to know the answer, but practice saying it. If they ask you for a salary range, think about how you're going to react to that. And it might be, I don't know, I'll get back to you, but you should be clear on what you're going to say instead of like, deer in headlights, because it can get a little tense. So I'm going to do some Q&A. And again, this is my book about collaboration. We're talking about interviewing today, but I do think that showing that you're a good collaborator will get you a long way in today's world. Thank you.
All right, everybody, give it up for Gretchen, but stay tuned because we're going into the Q&A. So this is where we do the kudos. Michelle Ronson, I'm bringing her up again. She actually inspired this moment. So everybody, you can use as many appropriate emojis as possible. Let's give it up for Gretchen. Love the presentation. Okay. Here, wait. That's a UXO. Woohoo! Thank you, Gretchen. Julia's, Eliza, great talk, Gretchen. Oh. I'll give a prop to me. Thanks, Design Career Network.
Yes.
Woohoo! Thank you. Thank you. But wait, there's more. Previously on Design Career Network. Hold on.
I'm scrolling to some of these.
Thank you, Gretchen. Elbow-off. Hopefully that's I don't know. Is that positive? I don't know. Thank you, Gretchen. Great tips. Thank you. And we saw some questions. We got so many more. Okay. I love a lot of, you had some like really fantastic points in there. And I love how actually it felt like your points were like, not, you left room for people to ask questions and have a dialogue, which I felt like was like a really awesome tip. So Gretchen is showing you her book, which is Mastering Collaboration. I have read this book. It's excellent, as mentioned. Not afraid to promote it if I believe in it. And we have a bunch of copies of this book. We're going to give away about 3 copies, maybe 4 if you're lucky, to people who ask great questions. And also we'll do like a quiz. We haven't quite figured out the trivia part yet, but we will wing it as we go. But I wanted to start with a question. Actually, Gretchen, I think it's really cool that you grew up on stage. I can totally relate to that, by the way, as like a musician, artist, singer, dancer, like totally, it does get you more comfortable talking in front of people, even though like for myself personally, I had to kind of break back into that. I had a little bit of stage fright for a bit when I started with these talks, but how does somebody who's really shy, I know that you touched on this, but how does somebody who's really shy approach, speaking in an interview and feeling confident? What are some tips to get them in that mindset?
Well, I think first I would like have you look deep inside as to like when you are shy, what does that mean? Does that mean you're nervous? Does that mean you really don't like to engage with big groups? Because all of those will have different approaches, right? So some of it is again that practicing, so you have the concise statements. You don't want to be like reading off a piece of paper, but you might be highly scripted. You might have, more of a less of a improvisational approach than like I would. So that's one tip. The other tip, there's what do they say, like imagine everyone's naked or whatever. But I don't know, that's never worked for me. But knowing that everyone in the room has some level of discomfort with being interacting with people and speaking can also help, even if again someone's faking it. But again, I think it's the fake it till you make it. Like really practice that. If you are someone who speaks very quietly, that can actually be an asset, but you want to watch your audience to make sure they are actually hearing you and going along with you. I'm kind of a big personality, but I notice the quiet talkers and the slow talkers sometimes really capture people's energy. So, the different things work for different people. If you're nervous, take your time, go slow, know what you want to say.
So it's about being prepared, basically, is what you're saying. And
Yeah.
okay, this is a great question from, is it Julius or Julius? What are some questions I can ask to determine if the culture and company aligns with my values? What a great question.
So first it's like, well, what are those values? So I list off some questions. Like for me, I ask questions around how are decisions made? How is conflict resolved? How is work packaged and executed and evaluated? Because that's where I'm going to struggle, I know, with a team, right? If I'm going to end up in a situation where decisions are arbitrary, made by fiat by the CEO because he's mad on Tuesday, that's not a situation I want any part of. So, and no one's going to answer you as honestly as that, but you can look for cues about, again, how confident are they about answering that question around how work gets done. So that's one thing, you have to think about what you're asking about. Is it about recognition and compensation? Ask about that. Like, what are you looking to get out of this? Is it about mentorship? So if you're earlier in your career, I always say like the best job is the job with somebody you're going to learn a ton from and build a network with. So you're finding that, questions about how are you supporting younger designers, or how are you, what kind of mentorship can I expect or can I offer? Those are all,
Really
ways
good.
to touch in on your own values.
Yeah. Also, perhaps like maybe like the amount of time that people are working per day, or the typical schedule for the company.
Yeah.
That could be like how much do they expect you to work day and night, or do they actually have a healthy working schedule? I feel like that's a really good thing to know if you're like, if you want balance. But
Yeah. And I would
right.
say, especially in COVID, right? Like, but even before COVID, I don't know, a couple places I've worked, I've had this idea of core hours. So like we all agree that between 10 and 3:30, we're all available. We can have meetings or whatever. But like I'm up at 7 and this engineer rolls in at 10:30 or rolls in at 10. That's cool. He'll work later, I'll work earlier, but we all agree, so if you can look for those norms around how people also manage diversity, because right now we're all living different things. Like I've got dogs and kids running around and that's my reality. So can they deal with that?
I love that. Christine I love this question. Christine says, I'm very conscious about I versus we talk and find myself saying we in interviews, which is awesome. But since I'm a female, I'm wondering if this is taking away from my own skills. What do you recommend?
Oh, I almost hate to have to ask that question because I think we versus I language is awesome, but I totally understand why you're asking about that. So both. I mostly talk in we until I get to a thing that I really feel like is and I need to talk about my work. So we solved the problem. We got the insight, but I made this journey map. I made this thing. to be very clear about the work that I own versus everyone else's work. So I think about it as we all did the whole thing together, and then each of us did little parts.
I love that. And that actually, okay, so for asking that question, Christine gets a copy of Mastering Collaboration. Christine, you can email me, Andy, A-N-D-I, at designcareer.org, and send me your address if you want a copy of this book, and I'll mail it out to you. We have a couple more, so stay tuned. All right. Now, congratulations. Woohoo. Okay. Now, okay, let's see. Oh, this is a great question, actually. So this is one that we're actually looking for somebody to talk about whiteboarding. If you guys have any suggestions, you guys and girls and people, humans, and doggies, of course, the cute one in the background. Question: what are your thoughts on design challenges? Some say it's giving free ideas and work away without getting paid. Others might think that it showcases your problem solving and UI skills. What do you think, Gretchen?
So, like I said, I've worked in multiple contexts where different versions of tests have come up. So I think that asking somebody to do a take home test that is highly related to the actual job is getting into that territory of free work. Um, Sometimes what they do in a take home test is, again, it's like one, it's a little bit removed. And maybe what they're looking for there is they want to see how you execute in more detail on an idea. What I would say back to that, though, is that's what my portfolio is for. So not that you should go argue with the hiring manager about their take home test, but it might help you think about which ones you go after. I do think that there is something to that. I mentioned the Cooper 5-step test. I think there is something to being able to show that you can improvise on a whiteboard. So I have done in interviews tests that are really like, hey, here's a little tiny feature. Let's just do it on the whiteboard, where I don't feel like I'm taking advantage of their free work because it's not in any high resolution. They're probably not going to come up with the solution we haven't thought about. It really is to see how they respond in that kind of improvisational situation. That being said, when I wrote the book and like now during COVID, I went into writing that book with this like, of course, co-located real-time interaction is the best and everything else is a poor man's second. And I think I've come around to that not being true. That actually when you have real-time people in a room trying to solve a problem, you might be picking bad solutions because it's tired and it's Tuesday. Because I have a big personality and I can make y'all do what I want. Honestly, if I really wanted to, I can boss all of you into my solution. And so I've kind of come around to, again, the portfolio that's you telling your story with your best work. So the extent to which you can have a strong portfolio and then be able to riff on it if they want you to. If you are shy, an introvert, that can be super stressful. So again, take a big drink of water, take a breath, and know that it's less about you solving the problem than showing up in a way that they want to interact with. Because the reality is, even if you're shy, you're going to have to at some point sit down with somebody and like hammer through a problem or several somebodies. So that's the way to think about that. But I think if they are literally like, please spend 48 hours solving this sprint challenge we have for this quarter, that sucks. No, I'm not a fan.
I've had that actually. So I've had as a, UX, marketing, communications, growth designer, whatever. I've had Twitter actually paid me for a design test. So
Oh,
I worked for like, they asked me what my rate was. I told them, and then I worked for like 3 or 4 hours, and they paid me for it. So it was pretty
it's
cool.
not a bad
I felt,
solution.
yeah, not bad at all. On the other hand, I've done work with another company, Atlassian, where I thought that it was a great challenge for, it was like a content designer role. And it was a great challenge, but it felt like a lot of work for a little, for just a design interview. But at the same time, I felt like they wanted to see how I work. So it's like, okay, this is more of an investment for me. Let's see if, let's just see what I can come up with. But at a certain point, you have to think, okay, is this worth it? Do I really want this job? I guess.
I
And
think
so,
the
yeah.
only valid thing in a test that you can't get from a portfolio is what is it like to work with you, especially if I
Oh,
push back,
yeah.
right? Like that's the thing I think a lot of people are looking for, which is like, well, when I have to give you some feedback, what is it like?
So,
So to the
yeah,
extent that you can answer that, in a different way, hey, then we had this big conflagration fight about this thing, and here's how we resolved it.
absolutely. Now we're going to Dara. Any process difference from a hiring manager perspective of hiring mid levels compared to an entry level?
Hmm. I don't know about process difference because I feel like that would be illegal. But you're looking for different things when you're hiring somebody that has, let's say 5+ years experience. There, I'm going to look more for um, how did you lead? How did you push back against a bad situation or bad input or whatever? What's the classic? Tell me about when something all went wrong. I would look for those stories where it's more about your ability to lead, your mentorship, kind of where you want to go to. If you have a specialty, I'm going to be interested in that. So, hey, I've done a bunch of AR work and I'm really into AR. I'm going to talk more about that than I would expect from a more junior designer that I'm expecting to be more of a generalist. I think what I found from both teaching and managing people is that school teaches you the process, it teaches you the craft, but not the judgment. So it really takes going through a couple of painful, falling down and skinning your knee a few times to get that experience where like, oh, that solution does not work in this instance, or this situation feels very similar to this other situation. Let's try the same thing we tried there. So that's kind of the difference I look for, is like, I want the more meta level understanding of skills from the mid levels, which is hard to convey in a portfolio. So that is going to come across more in the interview.
Interesting. Okay. This is a great question from Rachel. And then but before we get to that, let's ask a question. Um, and that is, what are some things that you can say when you don't know the answer? And let's see how the first people to answer. Let's see who they
Oh,
are.
you're not asking me, you're asking them.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. I'm asking the audience. What are some things you can say when you don't know the answer to it? From Gretchen's presentation, the winner will get a copy of Gretchen's book, Mastering Collaboration. Okay, let's see. Let's see. All right, is anybody going to answer? Maybe they don't know. Okay. Shannon. Oh, wait. Heather. Afanye. I don't know, but I'll look
Yeah.
into that later. Can you give me more details about all of these are valid. So guess who? Well, Christine, I believe that you. Hold on, wait. I'm like, didn't Christine win the last one, right? So okay, disqualified, but you can still answer and participate. Okay, Gretchen, you get to pick somebody, and then we'll move on
Uh,
to the next question.
okay, I'm seeing Ashley Way. I don't know, but here's a connection that I can draw for you. I don't know about
Awesome.
fintech, but I did healthcare, and here's how we're
Yes.
gonna make
Okay,
the connection.
Ashley, email Andy, A-N-D-I, at designcareer.org, and I will send me your address if you feel comfortable with that, and I will send you a copy of the book, of Gretchen's book, Mastering Collaboration. We have paperbacks. Thank you for answering. Thank you all for answering. Well, don't worry, we're gonna give away 2 more copies, so I'm feeling generous tonight. No, Gretchen, they're all from Gretchen, so she donated to us to give out to you. All right, now I had a question that I was gonna ask, and I lost it.
And I'm actually just seeing this note here about in New York, it's illegal to ask about salary
Oh,
history. And
yeah.
I don't know if it's illegal in California, but uh, yeah, it's not, they shouldn't be saying, I mean, if they do ask you, what did you make at your last job? You have to figure out an answer to that if you don't want to answer it. It might be, though, a way of level setting, like you say the number that you want, and then you've got a floor to negotiate from. But this other person here, Dara, says, hey, well, I've done research, and I actually just was talking with the former student today who's in the situation where, you just have to bring up the numbers and say, I think this is the number. What I always say to that is be prepared for what you say when they say no, right? If they say no. Right. So I want this number. Well, no, we can't do that. Are you like, well, I'm out? Are you like, well, okay, I'm here. I mean, you got to think through, and negotiating is not my
We had to talk
favorite
about that
sport.
last week. Yeah, we have a video on that from last week. Actually, that was from Chris Liu and Jonathan Chariot. So that's in the Design Career Network. And also, if there's anything that you personally, as the audience, wants to learn about, you can message me, email me, Andy at designcareer.org, or Andy at cascadesf.com. And I'm happy to learn about what you want, because I'm here creating this content for you. So for us, from me to we. Okay, now this is Rachel. Rachel asking a great question, which I understand entirely. Rejection sucks, but also Gretchen mentioned that it's really important to just keep interviewing. That's how you're gonna get better. But might have just answered part of the question. Sorry. What do I do if I'm getting interviews but not landing a job?
I mean, gosh, the user-centered designer in me is like, is there any way to get feedback? Can you follow up? Hey, understand I didn't get that. Can you give me any feedback? And if you've got a lot of interviews, there's going to be some kind-hearted people in there that will give you the honest truth. And maybe the honest truth is we had a hell of a lot of applicants. So, it may not be you. It may be, though, to think about, and maybe you do some mock interviews with a trusted friend or a mentor. So things that can happen is your portfolio looks great, but then in the interview, you fall back on very technical language. You're hard to understand. Maybe your nervousness is getting in the way of you being understood. So, if you can get some feedback on that. What I will say, I have been at this for more years than I want to admit, for 25 years. I have never gotten a response from a cold resume submission, right? So if I've submitted my resume for a job of which there are I'm one of 6 people in the world qualified for. I didn't even get a thanks for your resume. So that just shows me they got 1,000 hits and were drowning. So don't take it personally. It's very rare that it is personal. It's usually a numbers game. And it might be networking is a good thing that you could try, which is, can you get 1 degree closer to that person? I always say, there's a lot of people to say this to right now, but if I'm connected to somebody on LinkedIn and we're connected, I will do what I can to make that connection for you, because that's, right or wrong, kind of how things happen in our industry. We're a growing industry, but we're relatively small. It's a relatively small pool. So if you can network your way through some problems, that will go a long way. I lost you.
Okay, there we go. I'm on mute. I was getting advice from a mentor, finding a mentor, and multiple perspectives of different kinds of questions that you'll be asked and practicing them. I think that's awesome. And it also could just be maybe you're going after the wrong company as well, Okay, so Eliza, we're gonna get to your question, but before we go to that one, we'll go to Kristen and Christian. Thank you, Gretchen. Do you suggest to solicit questions as you go through the presentation or case studies, or should you leave the questions until the end? What do you prefer?
So in an interview, I definitely would solicit questions. These are people you do not know. You don't know if they're tracking. It's a good way to calibrate if they're asking you, if you're using words that they're I don't understand what that word means. You can take time to refocus. And I even would say and I used to do when I, had a job and I would do kind of more consistent presentations, I did used to say, I'm going to get through X and then I'll take your questions at the end. And I've kind of gotten away from that because it just is frustrating to the audience member that is sitting there. So what I've gotten around to is if you have a question because you're not understanding something, please jump in. but I'm going to give you another chance to go back through this in more detail and ask, and give me more detailed feedback after I get through it. Some of it depends on what you're trying to get through. So for example, if you have a experience map or a flow you're trying to show that you want to just get through, I would just say that, let me just show this to you, and then we can step through it in more detail and I can take your questions. So some of it is you can manage their feedback. But I have stopped trying to tell people not to ask me questions, because some people won't listen to you. And it can be off-putting if there's someone sitting there like, oh, I just want to ask her this question.
Totally. Okay. Now, Ayanfes asks, what are some of the key things to bring up to illustrate that you're an excellent collaborator? You should just get this book. We got to give Anya, we'll give you a copy of the book, just so, because I think it will be really helpful. So email me, Andy@designcareer.org. You're gonna dream about this email address. Are there any types of stories that you would share, Gretchen?
So I do think, hey, here's how I thought I was right and I learned that I was wrong is a good one. Here is the group of people I worked with talking about how you were able to get diverse perspectives into something, especially a designer, is fantastic. And by diverse perspectives, that might be, I worked with the engineer, right? And diverse is relative here, but the whole idea of collaboration is that you're bringing diverse perspectives to bear on a problem because you need them, because it's complicated, because it's ambiguous, whatever. There's multiple reasons why you do that. And so the extent to which you can celebrate that you've done that you like that, even if you hate it, and that you know how to learn, those are the kind of key points. So like I know for my students, when they get into their senior thesis, they're so excited to not have to do a group project. And part of me is like, group projects are life, baby. Like you can't do anything on your own. So can you celebrate how other people helped you get there? So, hey, I came up with the whole idea, but then I work with these people to make it real, is a very real scenario.
No, celebrate what if I'm going to follow up with that, and then we're going to Eliza. Sorry, Eliza. You're next. What if you have a bad experience working with somebody from the past, and how do you completely avoid talking about that, or do you talk about how do you approach a potential employer asking you questions about your past work experience if it wasn't something that you enjoyed?
Yeah, and that same goes for sometimes you have work that you want to show because it's relevant, but it's not like your favorite work. So you need to find a way to talk about the good parts. So it's also a bad idea to get into an interview and start bagging on your last team or your last boss or your whatever. Like, yes, there were challenges, but if you can focus on this is what was challenging, and here's how I worked through that. Even if, again, you didn't totally solve the problem, because I mentioned this in the book, like when collaboration fails, it's not like, oh, we all got together and then we came up with the absolutely worst idea in the world and we launched it. No, collaboration failure looks like we all came together, we hated each other, and we went back to our corners. And so can you tell a story that gets at the part that you made work for you, however small, however revisionist history? But I would focus on that. You don't have to not talk about it. If you really cannot find anything positive to say, though, maybe you'll sweep it under the rug.
Yeah. Okay, Eliza. Great question. Well, you have asked a lot of great questions, and I want to get to them. It's awesome. But what if you want to level up for a position, but you're not fully qualified? What's the best way to go about the interview?
So I know, Eliza, and I'm like, what are you not qualified for? But yeah, so I guess in general, what are you not qualified for? What does that mean? So especially for women, the way to move up is to move on. So in my career, often the way I got to the next level was by going after a job I was not qualified for. So I faked it till I made it. Right? Oh, have you ever managed people before? No, I haven't actually managed people before, but I was on the super big project. I was the lead and then I start talking about them in a way that is very much like managing people. So if you can find that way to reflect the work that you've already done being relevant to that kind of next level up. And I think it often is like, can you demonstrate leadership capabilities and management capabilities, or can you demonstrate like a very highly technical, like I'm going to focus on AR situation. So those are a little different. But if you're talking about the management situation, I would focus on stories that showcase your leadership, showcase how you brought people together, how you're a good communicator, all of those things. And know that you are qualified. You are
Yeah.
all qualified to do jobs, and the Peter principle is real. The Peter principle is that you're promoted to your level of incompetence. And if you haven't run into this yet, you will. You will run into that person where you're like, oh, you got this job and you should never have gotten, and you'll never get another one. So you're going to hang on to this with like all 10 fingers and all your teeth. That sucks, but you can get the job. I promise you.
Absolutely. So much of it is about confidence and also really also understanding like having that growth mindset. That's what I've heard over the past few weeks over and over again is like have that growth mindset where you show that you're, hungry to learn, but and you're humble and you still know how, but you have to still be confident.
Well,
Anyway,
and because designers do have the like stinky halo of like we're prima donnas, and like, hey, some of us, a lot of us are, and there's also a reason for that stereotype. But you don't have to lead with that stereotype, right? You can lean into I'm a team player who what pushed with my back against the wall to do a stupid solution is going to be like, no, let me go test that shit and get it out of here. We're not doing that.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Alexis, how do you recover from mistakes made during an interview? I'm wondering what kind of mistake. One that was going well, and then I gave an answer I wasn't proud of, but it wasn't pertinent to the particular job, and the whole room went flat. Aw, Alexis. It happens to
That
all of
sucks.
us. Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you find yourself going in to talk about something you're not proud of, I would stop and go back to it like, yeah, I don't know, I have to think about that. If you're in the middle of it and you can't stop and you've only just realized like, oh, I maybe shouldn't be talking about this. I mean, humor. Like I would make a joke, to kind of everyone does that. I'm hard pressed to think of like someone who's interviewed who said one thing that like killed it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a forgiving person like that, but I'm like, it just, the thing that's going to make me not hire someone is less that that person did something wrong. I might have a stronger candidate. It's kind of back to Rachel's question, where it's like a comparison situation, short of something really offensive. I don't know if the room goes flat though, and that's a chance to like, oh, I guess that was a bad joke, or like, maybe it sounds like you're maybe not understanding me, and like sort of seek that understanding about why the temperature came down.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe ask them questions to try and make it more about them, so that way it doesn't feel like it's the spotlight is on you, especially if you feel kind of awkward. But no, totally, it could be it could be very awkward if like you're in a weird mindset. But you can get out of it with confidence and skill. Okay. By the way, I see some questions about salary. Once again, we had a last week we had a discussion. It was like an hour and a half with Jonathan Chariot and Chris Liu, and it was all about negotiating salaries and where to look, and also like standard pay around the U.S. and a ton of great questions covering diversity and pay. So make sure to check that out. But this week we're focusing on interviews. And as far also for mentoring, Cascade SF, that's the UX organization that I run here in San Francisco. We haven't been live, like online, doing in person mentoring for a while, but we do run a mentor program, speed mentoring, here in San Francisco. You can join us on meetup.com/Cascade SF if you're in San Francisco. And also hopefully be able to find some other people to run those in other cities as things start to open up. So I have another. Okay. Oh yeah. I love it. We have the Peter principle. Okay. Oh, this is awesome. Actually, so Julius, how do you build collaboration with competitive colleagues? This is like so. I mean, it's like how I totally can empathize with that, but it's like how are you supposed to act?
Hmm. This is a really good question. So I have sort of a two ways to think about this. I hope I don't regret launching into this, but what I will say from watching a lot of my male colleagues, and actually I've learned a lot of this from my husband, is that I believe there is I'm just going to generalize to men, I'm sure women do it too, but there is this sort of, I want to establish dominance situation. I mean, my husband and I joke about it. He's like, yeah, I got to step in and like make sure they know I'm in charge or whatever. And now that I'm like aware that that's a thing, I do see it in places. And so what I have always tried to do is either meet that with the same energy. I too am an alpha dog because I can be that competitive person. Or what's the best thing to do? Like doing your reverse psychology, like, "Hmm, oh, were you looking for attention from me? Right? Like I have a puppy. You train people like you train puppies. Like you give the attention that you want to reward and don't feed the attention you don't want to reward. So that's my first thing. My second thing is no one is going to succeed on their own. So sometimes, like, let that person get way out on their heroic branch. And maybe as they start to fall, you help catch them or pick them up afterwards. Hey, do you want a hand next time? Sometimes you have to let people get all the way through this, but it's really, we are rewarded individually. Like our bosses are like, collaborate, be a team player. I'm going to make you competitive about salaries and advancement opportunities and evaluate you individually. Like the whole thing is fucked. But
We'll
individually,
blurb that out.
sorry,
It's okay.
screwed.
Yeah.
Screwed.
Messed up.
So, the other thing is like, can you talk to that person about that? Hey, we're in this together. Or, what are your goals for this project? My goal is to like solve the problem of X. Is your goal to get promoted? So yeah, that's my advice there.
Yeah. I like that about like syncing up and getting on the same page with them and trying to like listen to them. But that can be really tough, especially like when you're supposed to be working together to make the company better and make your working experience comfortable. But when you're competing against each other, it's like, okay, are we on the wrong team? Are we on the wrong, or maybe that's the issue, or you just have to get through it and just find a way to let one of you lead for the time being.
Yeah, and I do get into this in the book. I think at Cooper we had this thing where we had a navigator and a driver. So for inter-design team competition, this is really good for, because there's nothing worse than like the arms race of ideas on the whiteboard, because no one's listening to each other. You're just trying to stack your ideas up. So we would have one person would be the navigator. Okay, today we're doing the like login flow. We said that it had to be able to deal with multiple addresses, yada, yada, whatever the criteria are. And then let the other person come up with solutions. And then the navigator is like, how does it scale? What, asks all the nitpicky crit questions. Something that can be constructive in that situation is to be clear about those roles. Hey, you should come up with ideas today, and I'm going to be the navigator, and I'm going to like check our steps and our criteria. And then maybe tomorrow we switch. Right? You can be flexible about that, and that's helpful.
I love that. Yeah, because maybe you have a similar personality type and you just want to give each other the chance to lead. And I love that. But also kind of know what it's like to step back and listen, or just take notes or help out in another way. So another good collaboration tip from author of Mastering Collaboration. Okay, and we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I'll bring up the Kate, because Kate is awesome and Kate makes awesome sketch notes. So when the room goes flat, can you ask about it? Like, I noticed the energy in the room shifted. What just happened? It's a gutsy move, but hey, life is short and fearlessness is practice. What do you think, Gretchen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think being able to call, again, it points to, I am self-aware, I am paying attention, and I really want to know the answer. I'm not going to just pretend like that never happened. I'm going to I want to dig into this. A side note, I have an American friend that moved to London to work, and his career was going great. And I was like, what's your secret? He's like, my secret is I don't understand all their little accents and who's rich and who's poor. I'm just there. I show up as the American that's like, today we're going to solve poverty. Let's do it. And everyone loves that because they really just want to get on with life and not like, oh, he's from up there and she's from over there and she went to Eden or whatever.
Yeah. Well, okay. I have a question that's not in the in the comments right here, but it's actually for you as maybe a hiring manager. What are some ways that you kick off interviews? What are some questions that you ask potential hires, like potential UX designers?
Yeah, the format I always like to do is to have them come in. I give them a brief overview of like the team, the situation. I have them do their portfolio review. So I give them enough background so that they can be like, oh, I'm going to relate this project to that thing she just said about, we're doing AR, whatever it is. I keep saying AR, but give them some context to give them that chance to make it real to me, have them do their portfolio reviews and then break into smaller groups for more detailed interviewing. And so, a lot of my questions are like, how did you come to that insight? Or, sometimes if like a presenter is struggling where like a big problem could be showing me the output of user research, but not the insights. That all looks really interesting. What'd you learn? Like, that's really my big question. What'd you learn from that? What, if you reflect on that now, what would you have done differently? How successful was that? That looks like a really interesting solution. But was that good in the market? I always remember Hartmut Esslinger at Frog was like, it does not matter if I like your thing. It matters if it succeeds in the market. So like, I try to have that mentality of like, my blessing of your idea is not the be all end all. It's a step, but what you really want is ideas that win. And so are you the person that's really eager to learn from putting your stuff in people's hands?
I love it. I love that you have both agency experience and also the actual like hands-on product experience, like at PG&E, and you worked at Cooper because I've actually done a ton of like partnership stuff with Cooper and also Alan Cooper, the father of personas.
Well, and that's an interesting split. So I love consulting, especially for early career people, because it teaches you how to rapid parties, right? You quickly like, we're going to learn about this domain for the next 6 weeks, and then we're going to switch to something totally different. I remember at Frog, I was working on glucose meters for a long time. They took pity on me. I actually loved it. And they were like, you poor thing, we're going to give you a fun project. We're going to have you design casino slot machines. And I was like, okay. And then I was like, it's kind of the same thing. It's like people who are not making rational choices, but they're trying to get away from something that is very scary. And they want one button. I was like, oh, look, that's two things. Very different, very same.
Machines and health. Oh, that makes sense. That's why you give that talk, designing smart things. That makes sense. From a few years ago, Gretchen spoke at it was about data privacy and ethics. But she does a lot of well, I meant you're like active as an ethics designer and like somebody who's very politically aware. That's at least from my observation, which is awesome. Anyway, that's a total aside, and that now I have to do the Kate. I just noticed the energy in the room shifted. What happened? No. Anyway, I have okay. How do you build collaboration when you're joining the project in the middle as a freelancer and say that maybe you don't have? That's a good question. It might be a little bit. How do you show that you collaborated as a freelancer? I don't know. We can answer this.
Yeah, I feel for this because this can also be you not as a freelancer. You join in the middle of a project. And I think now that we're working in more agile, probably you're working more agile ways, you're kind of always in the middle of a project. And so I would get really good at, I'm sorry, I don't know that acronym. Or could you tell me more about that? Like you almost have to do like user research on your team to get them to get you up to speed. And hopefully they should be aware, but if not, you might have to point out like, that's not going to happen overnight, right? They had all this time to get there. So you're going to get there too. My other piece of advice is show work early and often. Hey, so I'm not as up to speed as you, but I just did a real quick rough thing. Are we in the ballpark? so that you can quickly course correct, and they can, again, you can demonstrate that you're willing to learn and you're not just trying to go off in a corner, come back with something and they're like, that's so not what we're looking for. So that show work early and often, and kind of always be interviewing. Don't be afraid to say, can you like tell me more about that? I am someone who it can be difficult because I move really quickly, and so I want everyone else to move really quickly, and so I've really had to be like, oh, that person is asking me for time, that person is asking for me to slow down, that person's asking for me to give them context. I need to do that for them.
Great. Okay. This is a very good question. So Dara asks, what leadership skills should I be developing with my design skills to set me apart as a hiring candidate? What a great question.
It's funny, I know Kate on this call would probably have a really good answer to this, but what I would say is there's sort of levels, right? So initially it's like you are kind of going to be brought in to do a very tactical solution. Likely somebody's going to say, it's so funny, I teach these students sort of doing these big esoteric projects, and then their very first job is going to be like, here's a 64 by 64 pixel thing that I need you to like finesse. So your leadership there is being able to know how to try out lots of different solutions, and again, learn and find what works. Kind of at the next level, it might be about forming the product manager, the CEO, or whoever on high sends down the, please make me a blue hexagonal 6-foot widget. And you say, it sounds to me like you're trying to solve problem X. And you demonstrate that you're able to take that really directive thing and reframe it into something that is more actionable for you. Because frankly, if you came up with the hexagonal 6-foot thing, they'd be like, did I say 6 feet? I actually meant more purple, more like 8 feet. I thought you would get that. So your ability to reframe into the how might we, right? Or the problem that you're trying to solve, get them to fall in love with the problem, because everybody shows up with the solution, and you can demonstrate leadership very early on by backing them up to. So it sounds like our assumption is, it sounds like our hypothesis is, if we do this, that will happen. And showing people you can think in that way is a great way to demonstrate leadership. And then the third level is moving into that more management thing is, I took this designer under my wing. I really helped them solve this problem. Here's how I did that. That's a little harder, can't put that in a portfolio as much, but you could demonstrate the number of people that you were brought together. If you made an innovative change to, we were doing it this way, it wasn't working, so I changed it to go that way and it worked better. Those are all, it's almost like I think about it as the meta level of design. There's the work you're designing, the little thing you're making, and then leadership is like all the stuff around that. And you can, as you get to be a manager, that's not even doing that anymore. It's all this. Designing the organization is your design problem. So you're working your way into talking about how you design a team, an organization, a process, a communication, all of that.
That's fantastic. And also, what about like presentation, like learning how to give talks in public, or like how to explain your ideas really well, and how to like public speaking might be like a really good leadership skill. You can give a talk, or maybe record yourself for a YouTube video. Vice versa. I'm like, okay. By the way, Dara, yes, I was gonna say that you get a book because you've been so awesome and asking great questions and active. And we'll ask one more question. It's not necessarily about the interviewing process, but it could be like in the case of like, what if everybody has a different approach or opinion? How are you supposed to remedy this collaboration effort when people are not being that collaborative?
Yeah. So it's very common that decisions get made by the hippo, the highest paid person in the organization. And I have a whole riff I could go off about that. But yeah, everyone does have a different approach or opinion or idea. And when I was a younger designer, I used to try to argue on principle. I did the user research. The number one issue is this. That thing doesn't address this. This other thing does address this. Therefore, QED, I win. And the thing is, I wasn't winning, though. I was like, still fighting. And I think I came around to a combination of more storytelling. Okay, let's take that idea, put it in a storyboard. That doesn't make a very compelling story. Or maybe it does. Also, the tools are so good now, like, screw it. Your idea, my idea, A B test it. I don't mean literally A B test it, although maybe, but like mock them both up and see where you get to. Because I've definitely also had that experience of like, I'm a genius. I'm going to mock up this idea, and that's the worst idea I've ever had. Never mind. So it's again, don't try to win. Try to say, I want the best idea. So let's try yours. Let's try mine. See where we get.
I'm like, awkward
You're
silence.
multitasking.
No. Yeah, no,
Yes.
I was
Kate, I
letting them
did
know
do a
that-
Gretchen Clippy too. I love.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah,
You
no,
look
I was
like you're trying to design a hexagon.
Anyway. Okay, I think that's actually all of the time that we have for today, as it's been a very wonderful, informative, useful event. I always love working with you, Gretchen. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yay for Dara getting a book. Yes, Dara, you deserve it. Everybody deserves a book. You can get Gretchen's book on Amazon, or maybe directly through Early Media, Mastering Collaboration. It is awesome. There's also like digital versions available. It's worth it, especially whether you're at a UX interview or you just want to learn how to work better together with your team, or maybe just explain your process. There's all kinds of great information.
Feel better about the hostage situation you're in.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you're just not in a collaborative situation, and like you just maybe know that and take a deep breath and be like, okay,
absolutely,
I'll go interview for a new place.
It might not be the right fit, but absolutely. And I really love the whole we mindset that we learned today, and that you focus on how you worked as a team, but also make sure to highlight your individual contributions and how you specifically helped out and did the work, but also how you worked with others. I think that's so valuable. There's a lot of really good information. I took some notes. So thank you all for joining us. Just to let you know, thank you, Kate, thank you, Gretchen. I was saying thank you to Kate because she said this has been so great. Yay! Woohoo! Yay!
Fantastic. Well, I hope all of you have great interviewing experiences. You can keep in touch with me. I'm pretty easily found on the internet. So
what is it?
Again, Greta Red Twitter, GretchenAnderson.com. You can reach me easily.
Very
let
easily.
me know if you want to stay in touch.
Awesome. So just to let everybody know, thank you, Gretchen, and stick around for just a minute. Hold on, stay around. Here you go. Okay, so wait, I'm not Gretchen Anderson. I'm Andy Galpern. Andy Galpern, the producer of Design Career Network, and we are at Design Career Network on Twitter. We have our upcoming lineup at designcareer.org or youtube.com/Design Career Network. Just to let you all know, what's happening next week is we'll have Magali Green. I think that's her last name. Pretty sure. Anyway, Magali is a LinkedIn recruiter. She's a design recruiter at LinkedIn. And she's actually going to be critiquing resumes and giving advice on how to make your LinkedIn as powerful and effective as possible. And that will be next week. It will actually be on Thursday. I believe that's May 6th, if that's Thursday. Yeah, because it's the day after Cinco de Mayo, if that's an actual holiday, whatever. And also, we have some really awesome talks coming up. We have Natasha from EA giving a talk about what hiring managers look for in candidates as far as soft skills. And also, we have Nick from... well, I'm trying to remember what company that Nick is from, but he's going to give a talk about working with teams and hiring an entire team, putting a team together. We also have Matt May from Adobe giving a talk about accessibility and getting a job as a UX accessibility specialist. Matt is the head of accessibility at Adobe. So anyway, I'm Andy Galpern. I'm your host, and that's all for tonight. Thank you so much. If you like this talk, go ahead and like us on YouTube and subscribe to us, like this video. It really helps us grow. And also send me suggestions, Andy at designcareer.org, ANDI at designcareer.org, with any suggestions or maybe a nomination of somebody that you would like to speak in the near future. So thank you so much. And also don't forget, for those of you who got a copy of Gretchen's book, Mastering Collaboration, who won a copy tonight, go ahead and email me, ANDI at designcareer.org. Send me your contact information. Don't worry, I'll keep it private, your address, and I'll send you a copy of the book. So that's all for tonight. Thank you, and have a great night. This is Andy Galpin signing off.